Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to show y'all how to do something really fun. We are going to do a Skinner color blend using fondant. Skinner color blends were developed by Judith Skinner. She was actually a polymer clay artist, and she worked out a way to create a much simpler method for creating gradients in clay that didn't require a whole lot of color mixing. So we're gonna do the same thing with fondant because her method translates really well for fondant color blends, okay? So the most important things to remember when doing color blends is you wanna work with colors that are really far apart from one another. If you take two colors that are really close together in hue or value, they're gonna look really muted and you're not gonna see very much of a transition. But when you work at with colors that are bright, very different in color or in value, so light to dark, that's where you're gonna see the biggest blend, okay? So we're gonna start with a simple color blend using just two colors. So for that, we're gonna use this sort of bright blue to a white, and we're gonna create a blue ombre gradient effect for a cute little 6-inch round cake, okay? Okay, so for a 2-shade gradient, for a 2-color gradient, first of all, we wanna make sure we're using enough fondant together in weight to wrap around, to panel around whatever size cake we're gonna be wrapping. And today we're doing this 6-inch by 6-inch dummy, okay? So I know this is enough fondant here to panel around the outside of that dummy. I'm also gonna cover the top of the dummy with, or the cake, whatever you're working with the color gradient, the color in the gradient that I want to be aligned with the top of the cake. So in this case, we're gonna be doing a blue to white gradient, and I'm gonna cover the top of the cake with white fondant, all right? So once I have my two colors and they're mixed and conditioned, good and pliable, what I'm going to do is use my rolling guides to roll out 2 squares, or rectangles, I should say. I'm gonna roll out 2 rectangles that are approximately the same size, one in each color. It's really important that these are the same thickness as well, because we want to ensure a really even gradient, and we can do that by controlling the thickness and size of our fondant transitions. You'll understand what I mean here in a minute. Okay. Trying to get it as square as possible. All right, set that one aside, and I'm going to come back in with the white and do the same thing. You can see I'm trying to manipulate this to be about the same size as the blue rectangle. Alright, so let's see. These are about the same size, they're the same thickness. So I'm just going to dust the top of this with some cornstarch just a little bit to keep it from sticking. And then I'm going to lay the white piece on top of the blue piece, okay? All right, so as you start working with more and more blends, you will start learning how to prep your blend vis-a-vis the size and dimensions of your rectangle. Different projects are going to require different shapes of triangles. But since we're just starting out here in the beginning, and this is gonna be sort of a crash course, we're gonna start with just a regular rectangle shape, all right? So I'm going to cut a rectangle, 2 rectangles, the same exact size, by cutting these overlapping pieces of fondant. Try to keep your corners as 90 degrees as possible. All right, So at this point, we have to make a decision about our gradient blend. Do we want our gradient to start from a true white and end in a blue as true to this as possible? Or do we want the beginning of our gradient to be slightly more blue than this white and the end of our gradient to be slightly lighter than this blue? Okay, if you're okay with the edges of the gradient, the ends, end to end, not being those true colors, then you can go ahead and cut your rectangle from corner to corner. I want to maintain some of this true white and some of this true blue. So I'm actually going to offset my cut. Instead of cutting from here, from corner to corner, I'm gonna cut about 1/2 inch off of those corners in either direction, okay? Now, keep in mind, either cutting on the inside or the outside of the corner is going to change which direction that we roll our gradient in. What you need to know is, if you cut on the insides, whatever side you're cutting into, that's the direction that your rolling pin is going to be rolling. So if I cut from here to here, I'm cutting on these sides, I'm gonna be rolling in those directions. If I cut from here to here, I'm gonna be rolling in this direction in order to maintain that true color on the end of the gradient, okay? So in my position, I really want, this is about the height of my cake dummy. Okay, it's a little bit bigger, but it's approximately the same size. So I want to cut from here to here because I'm gonna be rolling in this direction in order to create a panel to go around my styrofoam dummy, okay? So I'm gonna mark about 1/2 inch in and 1/2 inch in, and that 1/2 inch is how much true color I will have at either end of my gradient, okay? So cutting one long blade is the best way to do this so that you get a nice even cut. Okay, so now I'm going to take my 2 halves apart and stack them on top of one another so that they are the same size, okay? And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the blue, but right next to it. And now you see I have 1/2 inch here of true white and 1/2 inch here of true blue, okay? Bring these back over here. And I'm gonna keep my rolling guides handy because these really help me maintain the shape as I'm rolling the gradient. If you have a fondant roller, like an industrial fondant roller or even a KitchenAid pasta roller, that can be really helpful when you're working on gradients like this, especially like if you're using smaller pieces. So if you have a KitchenAid pasta roller and you're just making a small piece of fondant gradient, out a long gradient to wrap around a cake, then working with a rolling pin or with a large sheeter is probably gonna be the easiest way to go. But since most of us don't have those big fondant rolling machines, I'm just gonna show you how to do this with a rolling pin, okay? So now that I have my pieces together, I'm just gonna secure them a bit like this. All right, so as you can see, right now we have that diagonal down the middle of color, but it's symmetrical on both sides, okay? So what we're gonna do is we are going to try to maintain this shape here, and we're gonna take this and fold it over. It is really important here that you keep your pieces aligned, okay? So the edges should line up perfectly each time. You don't want them to be overlapped like that because then you're not gonna get an even gradient. You want edge to edge perfectly aligned, okay? Now I'm just gonna give this some rolls. Okay, I'm trying to keep this approximately the same height as my dummy because I really want as much of this white and as much of this blue to line up with the top and bottom as possible. Okay, and from here it's just a labor of love rolling. You can you can flip your pieces over every once in a while if you need to. It's gonna look kind of strange right now as you're rolling, but the more passes you make, the more folds you make, the gradient is going to start to come through. If you need to dust your counter with cornstarch or powdered sugar, go ahead and do that, but don't incorporate too much because we're gonna be rolling and rolling and rolling, and we do not want this to dry out, all right? All right, so if you have a rounded off edge here, don't worry about it too much. You can continue to fold it like this, or you can also do what we call a single fold. So if you come from the pastry world where you're making croissants and laminated doughs, you might have seen this before, which is basically like we're folding it in sort of like a book, okay? And that will help me maintain my corner, my nice corners there. All right, I don't know if you can see, but some of that blue is starting to come through, all right? So we're starting to see some lines and some shades of color in here. So I'm just gonna keep rolling and you guys watch as that gradient starts to appear. Make sure as you're working that you resist the urge to roll in this direction. The only time you're really allowed to do that is at the very end if you're trying to adjust and make sure you have enough width to cover your cake tier, okay? Okay, so you guys starting to see that nice gradient come through. We have that true blue at the bottom and we have that pure white at the top. And I'm gonna do a couple more passes just so that this is as clean as possible. If you look up close, you can see it's still just a little bit grainy. We want it to be super clean, perfect gradient. I'm going to wrap that under like that, but maintain my shape. So we can also stretch this a little bit just to help thin this dimension in. All right, so I think we have the gradient now that we were looking for. So I'm gonna fold this in one last time. Get a good amount of cornstarch down. Okay, and now I'm gonna turn this the other direction. Got a few little speckles here because I was working with some leftover fondant and it had some dry spots on it. That's no big deal. Just pull them out and they will smooth right away. Okay, so at this point when we're rolling this out to wrap our dummy with, it's okay if you need to roll just a tiny bit in this direction, but you always want to save that for last, all right? All right, so make sure that you have enough height and width to roll up your whole dummy, okay? You can check both sides of the gradient and see which one you like best. So like this side I have a small seam there and I don't really want to use that, so I'm gonna go back to this side. And really quickly, I'm going to cover the top of my dummy. Okay, so I want this side of my gradient to be on the outside of my cake. And the way I panel my cakes is I roll them up into the fondant. So this is gonna be on the outside. So I want that to be pointing down. Okay, so remember, I'm gonna cover the top of my dummy in white because I want that side of the gradient to be up. So I'm going to roll out some white fondant. I would do this the exact same way if I was working with a real cake, okay? So don't be afraid to try this with real cake. All right, so for a dummy, the same way I do with my real cakes, I cover them with shortening before I lay the fondant over, and that's because it is so easy to remove it if I didn't do a good job the first time. And then I like to use a piece of wax paper to flip them over because I don't want this fondant to be sticking to anything. And I'll also grab a little acrylic, an acrylic disc here to help me flip that guy over. And then basically I'm just going to come around the outside of the cake, keeping the knife 90 degrees, so flush against the side of the cake or the dummy, whatever you're using. I'm gonna trim off any excess there. Flip my cake back over. Generally, I would remove the wax paper and put it underneath the cake so that it's easy to move and manipulate. Smooth my top corner down. Okay, and now comes the fun part. Okay, so I brought my gradient piece back and got where you can see it. What I want to do is I want to cut a straight bottom edge. All right, so I'm gonna keep this as straight as I can, avoiding any wonky areas in the fondant. So like right here, I had a bit of a crack. And then I'm gonna cut another straight edge right there. And what I'm going to do is take my cake, and actually I did that the wrong way. I'm gonna cut a straight edge up at the top because I want to keep the top edge of my cake aligned as I'm paneling this, not the bottom edge, so sorry for that. All right, so I'm keeping the top edge of my cake aligned, and I'm simply going to stick it down because it's got shortening to hold on the edges, and I'm going to keep that top edge aligned. Roll my cake all the way up. And then bring this guy back. Yes, that is exactly how I do it with a real cake. No difference, I promise. Got a little spot here on the back that's got a tear, so I'm just going to rub that together really quickly and heal up that little tear there. And then take my edge, my knife, whichever one is the sharpest, cut straight up through both pieces of that fondant. Remove the inside piece if it didn't come out already. And then smooth the side seam. Of course, I probably wouldn't pick up a real cake like that to show you because I'd put a dent in the side. But you see I'm rubbing that seam to try to close it as much as possible. And then I'm gonna trim the bottom with my X-Acto blade. Nice, straight, smooth cut all the way around. This would be the bottom of your cake, so you'd be cutting against the cake board here. And whenever you do this, cut into the center, towards the center, and that will give you a cleaner cut. Usually I like my X-Acto, but it seems like I have some fondant stuck on it, so it's not cutting as smoothly as I would like. Need to change the blade. Okay. So, turn your cake back over and check to be sure everything lines up at the top. You want to have the smallest, minutest, most minute seam possible. So you, okay, got that little piece that got stuck. Pull that guy out. All right, so now we have a really nice, beautiful blue to white gradient on this cake tier, and I mean, this makes for a really nice like sky background, or you could do it in green and have tall grasses. This is just a really nice versatile effect that you can use so many different ways.